Welcome to the Modern Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dave. I'm here with my co-host, Greg. Greg, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, you having a nice day?
I am, because we're finally doing something that's mainstream. You know, we're not in the 1800s. You know, we're not off somewhere, you know, in antiquity. So, Dave, I'm going to start it off like this. Love is hard to find, right?
Yeah.
It's difficult to find someone you're compatible with, especially if your interests fall into a very specific minority.
Okay.
And all right, you know, this is where I'm going with this. 1 in 166,000 people are potential serial killers, right?
Say that number one more time.
1 in 166,000. That's kind of a lot, right?
I thought you were going to say 1 in 666,000.
Oh my God.
Drift.
Yeah.
If you get my drift, yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Wink, wink, nod, nod.
So that's the odds aren't with you if you're a serial killer to find, you know, a like-minded person, another serial killer. Like the odds of meeting another one is staggering. I can't do that math, right?
That makes me feel so sad for them.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know this was going to be a sad podcast.
It's not, because you know what? We've got a couple here that beat the odds.
Wow, that makes me happy now.
Yeah, be happy. So we're talking about the Ken and Barbie killers here. And, you know, it's kind of in vogue because Ken and Barbie are in pop culture and got society in a chokehold right now, don't they?
I guess so, because there is a movie featuring those two characters.
Not these two characters.
Not these two characters.
So these two characters do have something in common with those two characters, though, in that both these humans and the dolls have no capacity for empathy. I wrote that.
All right, Greg, I don't believe you. All right, so we are going to talk about the early lives of Ken and Barbie, aka, actually, no, it's not aka. Ken and Barbie would be the aka, but Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. Let's talk about Karla first, all right?
Okay.
Karla's a little easier, I think, to describe her childhood. And Greg, feel free to fill in any of these gaps right here. So Karla was the eldest of 3 girls. She was considered to be a popular girl. I guess she would be described as attractive. She was also described, though, by people who knew her as driven, and she desired to work with animals. That aspect of Karla is sort of mind-boggling, because you think about people who enjoy working with animals, and you think about, I don't know, kind, nurturing, sensitive, probably a bunch of things that don't describe Karla.
Yeah, I mean, it gives me does she get to work with animals? Does she get to see them die? There's like this morbid fascination there. I think that's part of it.
Well, possibly. I don't know if we can say that for sure. But also, aside from driven and, you know, her love for animals, she was also described as bossy when she was young, which I think we can kind of see as she gets older. Another person who knew her in college and other college friends, actually, they recall her having moments of like elevation and then moments of deep, deep depression. So she has these highs, and at times, like when she's having those highs, she might have like grandiose goals, like very like various careers that she wants to try to pursue, and just like kind of all over the place, scattered. And then when she has the lows, they got to the point where actually she would have suicidal ideation and at times attempts. So that's pretty bipolar. If you were to like, just from, you know, the first description of that, it's like, oh, wow. All right. I feel like we see what we're working here with.
Well, I mean, even the reason why I bring up like a morbid fascination is did you hear about that story in her childhood when she was playing with a friend's hamster?
See, I was going to bring that up, but also like, I was going to bring it up more in the realm of like every story you hear about Karla Homolka, they bring this parachute. All right. So she takes her friend's hamster, puts like a homemade parachute on him and flings him out a window. And, you know, he doesn't make, he's struggling and then eventually dies. And she's, you know, looks at it and she sees the body and stuff like that. That's like the only description. But also, like, I'm not gonna lie to you. Does that really alarm you as much as like I think it's like searching for something, and like I could see it being almost like a childhood mistake.
I don't know. I feel like maybe you're making it seem like you've murdered an animal, like a guinea pig or something.
I think I've accidentally done like made a poor choice with an animal, and then it's like, damn, like that. Obviously.
But the rest of the story is she dug it up to examine it, and that gives me it makes me feel like something Jeffrey Dahmer would do with his fascination with.
Yeah, but let me ask you: if you only hear one account, does that like you've never done anything weird, Greg? Dude, you've done some weird stuff. Look at you.
Yeah, I mean,
you have your hat backwards right now. You got a big smile on your face.
I get a little weird.
You get a little weird on the weekend.
You don't just have a mustache and not be a little weird.
Yeah, she doesn't have a mustache. That's true.
More than bipolar, she has this sense of she knows what she wants, and she doesn't really care who she has to step on to get there. That's the sense that some of her friends get. Like she even brings up that thing where, she has this diamond club, and the goal of that club was you're gonna marry young and rich.
Yeah.
You're gonna get married young, and you're gonna marry someone rich. And that's their goal in life.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun.
So here's a couple of small details about her parents' dynamic that I think are interesting and play a role in her later years. So her parents had some difficulties. I think that, it involved kind of like maybe verbal abuse, cheating, things like that. So dad was eventually caught by mom with cheating. And do you know what mom suggested that they do in order to fix the situation?
I don't.
Mom suggested that they have a threesome with the mistress. So rather than get angry with the dad and, and threaten to, leave or divorce, her solution is let's have the mistress join us and we'll have a threesome.
So that's teaching her it's important to keep the man at all costs, no matter what you have to do.
And to let's utilize his interests. Let's utilize his interests to get what we want or to, keep the situation safe and together.
Well, that's definitely going to come back.
Yeah. And the other thing that's interesting is despite abusive behavior, Karla was very close to her father. I don't think that that's like crazy or unheard of. I just think it's an interesting dynamic considering some of the things that we end up seeing in the future from her.
Mm-hmm.
Greg, do you have anything else about Karla's early life?
No, I think that, although I just wonder, as time goes on, we will see that there's something a little deeper than bipolar or anything like that. You couldn't find anything, maybe traumas, maybe in utero, anything?
No, not for Karla, but I do think like the suicide attempts are interesting because, it's for someone who, like, obviously, we're talking about a potential mood disorder or something like that. But for someone who has such like a boss type personality, to hit those lows where she's committing suicide, like she has suicidal ideation and she's attempting suicide. I just find that to be such an interesting contradiction to each other, right?
I do too. That
confidence, yet that like unworthiness.
Yeah.
So is that confidence fake?
There's some turmoil. There's some turmoil in the house, but there's no like severe trauma or anything like that. It's kind of,
yeah.
It's not like she comes from some of these households that will, even Paul himself comes from a much worse condition.
Yes. So let me move over to Paul now. So Paul was born August 27th, 1964 in Scarborough, Ontario. We didn't even mention that this is a Canadian-based story. So I think that's kind of interesting. We haven't really covered anything. I don't know. We have covered Canadian stuff, I guess, when we did like the reservation schools, but
yeah.
I don't know. It's just something.
Well, you don't really expect this kind of behavior from the Canadians, do you?
No, everything's better over there,
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that.
Everyone's happy and polite.
We're going to see about the rules over there in Canada when this goes to court.
Sure. So Paul's family was wealthy, and like an outsider looking in would probably think that this was like a picture perfect family. Far, far from it. So his parents were Kenneth and Marilyn. Marilyn was a housewife and Kenneth was a respected accountant. Kenneth was also a heavy drinker and he was controlling and abusive. And that was tracking back to the birth of their first child between the two of them, because Paul did have two siblings. He had an older brother and then a middle sister, and then him. After giving birth to a son and a daughter, Marilyn began seeing a former boyfriend and became pregnant. And that little baby was baby Paul.
It's interesting that the dad's name is Ken, though, like for real.
Oh, yeah. I didn't, dude, that's actually so funny you said that. That didn't even dawn on me that I'm like saying the name out loud because it's Kenneth. I wasn't even like putting two and two together. That is funny. All right.
That's like when Kenneth wears like when Barbie and Ken, when Ken wears like the business suit, he's Kenneth.
He's Kenneth. Yeah. Old Ken. So Kenneth actually knew of the affair, but he still was listed as the biological father of Paul, and Paul was unaware that Kenneth was not his biological father. Interesting thing, because you did ask me about like kind of any complex traumas or anything for Karla, but actually Paul had aphasia, which is the loss of ability to express or understand speech, which had occurred when he was in birth, and he was lacking oxygen because there was an umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. And he also had a physical deformity on the roof of his mouth.
So that could, suggest some kind of damage to the prefrontal area, lack of oxygen.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, that could have created the monster right there. Also, his father was abusive. Wasn't he like, he was a pedophile, wasn't he?
I didn't get there, Greg.
Oh, okay.
Settle down, young man.
When I see a pedophile, I got to call it out.
Jesus. So aside from anything that was going on in the home, Paul always portrayed himself as happy. He was normal. People referred to him as polite. But inside the home, Kenneth was, continuing to be abusive. His mother, Marilyn, was suffering from depression. She was isolating herself. She eventually ended up converting the basement into a bedroom and started sleeping separately from Kenneth. It got so bad. Paul was, I guess, for lack of better words, neglected. He sometimes went out without meals. He wouldn't have clean clothes, and he was being teased by peers due to his appearance and his smell. So for you think about Paul's development, you got to think about how this kind of separates him from his peer group. So he's lacking, social skills, connections, and he's feeling isolated.
Dave, is Paul aware at this time that his father is not his real father?
You're the worst. No, I'll tell you when he is, Greg.
Okay.
Jesus Christ.
I'm anxious listening.
You are anxious for sure. No, you're just anxious. All right. So Kenneth, at this point, begins sexually abusing Paul's sister. At times it's this is crazy. At times it's actually in front of the whole family while they're gathered in a room, maybe like during movie night or whatever. He's actually molesting her like under a blanket. So his sister, I really feel bad for her. So aside, she's getting, molested and abused. Her dad's actually like peeping in on her while she's changing. So she would have to like close the curtains. And he was like masturbating while he was watching her and stuff like that. Just really, really uncomfortable and stuff that no child should have to deal with from a parent or anyone, but like especially a parent, right? Her dad, Kenneth, also had the police called by a neighbor at some point because he was attempting to peek through their windows. So therefore, Kenneth is kind of a peeping Tom. And overall, just a pervert, right?
Yeah.
He eventually ended up facing charges for pedophilia, as Greg, spoiled that one. Child molestation, being a peeping Tom, and yeah. And just also like just the abuse. It just lasted. But at 15 or 16, that's when Paul learns that Kenneth is not his bio father, and instead he was a product of an affair. I think so. This is the part that sometimes got gleamed over. I think the way the mom worded it, though, was to actually call Paul like a bastard child, which is not the best way to tell your son that he's
That's pretty unbiblical, as you.
That is unbiblical of her.
Yeah. Do you think that? So they both have these formative moments where it's like cementing their views of the opposite gender. So he's seeing it like women can't be trusted. And he's also seeing the way his father treats women. You can kind of do with them what you will.
Yeah, exactly. So this, after he learns this and that treatment from his mom, he begins just going on verbally abusing, degrading his mom at that point. I guess he refers to her as an it. He doesn't refer to her as mom. He just lays into her, calls her the worst things. But still, like from an outsider, he appears to be okay, quote unquote. Like people aren't seeing it's such this Greg, this idea of him, how he presents as okay, but there's all this stuff going on inside. To me, this almost represents Paul, because he's like, and even Paul and Karla, they're related them as a couple. There's like, it's like an analogy. They are analogy for what he experienced as a child. Like outside, it's this pretty picture. It's these, attractive looking people. It's, they're all smiles. They, there's all this camcorder footage of them fooling around and having a great time. Inside, what the reality is horrible. They are, abusive. They have no knowledge of how a relationship actually works. All they've experienced in like the closest relationships to them are verbal and physical abuse.
Dave, it's so strange that like the way, like a beautiful family or these people on their own, like Paul and Karla, they're both good looking people. Like beauty is so disarming. Like we don't think that beautiful people can do things like this. It's something.
And this, and we'll get into this, but like, this is the thing that allows Paul to even exist as a rapist, as somebody who, a murderer. They get away with so much because of how they look.
Yeah.
Or how they present. There's definitely looks play into it. I will 100% say that. I'm sure that they look normal. They're, I guess everybody says like they're attractive. But the other part is also, though, Paul knows how to play a part.
Mm-hmm.
He knows how to present as, like I said, okay. He has manners. He obviously is observant enough at times to pick up social norms. Mm-hmm. And they utilize that to make themselves look unassuming.
I'm not 100% sure he's the sociopath in this whole thing. And
he's got some stuff for sure.
He's got some stuff for sure.
So some red flags as a child. I mean, he was collecting pornographic photos from the age 10, and then to the point where, age 17 or however old, he obviously needed to get more exposure than just pictures. He eventually picks up his dad's hobby of peeping Tom.
Yeah.
And he's peeking through neighbors' windows. An interesting thing is also that, like, after school, he gets a sales job and he starts to utilize his skills as a salesman in order to pick up women. And that becomes a little bit of a hobby of him and his buddies. It's a form of manipulation, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. Like I mentioned, like when he was younger, he was getting picked on and he didn't know how to gain friends. He didn't know how to make connections because he was kind of pushed away. So here he is as an adult learning the art of like sales. And he's like, hey, wait a minute. I can use this to make connections. But he also doesn't really know what an actual connection is. So all he's having is these short, unsuccessful encounters. Maybe there's a little abuse involved, so people are running away from him. As soon as they see this other side of him that's kind of dark, he pushes people away or they run.
Yeah, he has this. And when I say, to correct myself, when I say he's not the sociopath in the relationship, I think he's not the worst sociopath. They're both obviously sociopaths. But doesn't he have this, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself again, but doesn't he have this fascination with virgins too? Like it's his goal to take the virginity of as many women as possible.
Yep, you're right. So but he views relationships and sexual encounters in women, he just views it as so casual and so fleeting.
Like so a conquest.
It's a conquest, exactly. And it probably feels good for him. I would imagine if I was a child and I struggled making connections, if I struggled having any kind of like form of like feeling good, like somebody actually loves me, but like I have these moments, it probably feels really good to have these encounters, have these brief, and then he's got like the violent twist to it. So obviously he can't hide that.
He might be thinking, I'm better than my father was. I don't need to have, rape members of my family. Sure. I can convince women to get the same, result. But he's not like, this isn't for emotional gratification. This isn't for connection. This is just for him to collect as many sexual conquests as possible. And he doesn't care how it leaves them.
Yeah.
And if he needs to get violent, he will.
And, at the age of 19, he studied at the University of Toronto. So, I mean, he's college and, all that. So he's not like an unintelligent person. So, he's kind of an interesting individual in the scope of like this
Ted
kind of
Bundy
stuff.
type.
Yeah. Yeah. So a woman that he dated later testified that, when he was younger, that their sex life was abnormal. It was heavily based around violence, things like strangulation with cords and sodomy at knife point. So, I mean, this is the stuff this guy's into. It's like, I don't just enjoy sex. I enjoy violence in sex, and it's all intertwined. It's all intermingled. His exposure to how people show love is all intertwined with violence, right? And that's what he witnessed in the home.
Some weird like chemistry, some lines crossed inside of his brain when he was choked.
But you got to also keep in mind, like, it was modeled to him. His dad was abusive. So like, yeah, sure. I think his brain, it definitely, had its own issues, but like, he is a product of his environment directly. Another thing that ends up happening, and it kind of defines like his lifestyle, is he reads a book that ends up becoming his Bible. And that book is actually, ironically, one of my favorite. It's actually my favorite author, one of my two favorite authors. And it's a book that I know really well, but it's Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho, which we've mentioned here on the podcast a few times.
So the book is, it's interesting to be a Bible for someone, though. There's some, if you've seen the movie, you've seen the movie, but in the book, there's some gruesome stuff.
It's incredibly gruesome.
Yeah. I mean, there's like some dark, abusive, maybe even too intense to get into in this podcast.
The thing about the character, though, and I think the thing about the character that he probably connects with is Patrick Bateman, who's the main character in American Psycho, has zero empathy.
Mm-hmm.
He has zero emotion towards any individual. He has zero connectiveness to any individual. He literally is about success, which Paul, and this is something that like I heard here and there, but it wasn't like heavily discussed. Paul is very motivated by money. Like that is a big part. And that, wealth, he grew up in wealth. So I'm sure that's a driving factor. So I'm sure he loved that. But also Patrick Bateman in American Psycho would go to nightclubs and, they would pick up women. There was just like, he was living this lifestyle that I'm sure was very desirable to Paul, who's desiring wealth, violence, sex, and just overall, lack of emotional connectedness to anything.
It's like that old saying, like the devil in disguise. He's got this duality to him. He's existing and thriving in society while also like the nightlife or his dark side is doing like the antithesis of society.
Yeah.
That's like who he really is. It's like, it's scary that he can exist, like walk among us and unnoticed and be this monster.
Yep.
It's really scary.
It really is. And, so the thing that I found really interesting about this true crime case is that we have this really like this power couple, Ken and Barbie killers. But even before he was part of the Ken and Barbie killers, before he got part of that musical group, he is the Scarborough rapist. So he had an identity, a criminal identity, even before he was actually in part of the Ken and Barbie killers. So the Scarborough rapist was Paul from May 1987 to 1990, I believe, was one of the later ones. But basically, he committed at least 11 rapes during this time. They were often younger women who he was stalking as they exited buses in the evening and then would attack. And he was able to do this because he was unsuspecting, his looks. He just was able to blend in and not look suspicious.
Dave, to the point where they had a sketch of him, they brought him in, and after talking to him, despite the sketch looking exactly like him, they let him go.
Yeah.
I mean, and the type of
hey, what was his response when they showed him?
I have no, like, that it looks nothing like me. I don't know.
No, it was like, oh, I could see how you might see that.
Oh yeah,
dude, he played into it. He actually, and that's another thing about him. He almost like it's dark psychology. Like, oh, I see why you would think that. That does look like me. That's crazy. You know, like that kind of response.
The sadistic nature that he has too is unparalleled. Like when he would rape his victims, he would say, all right, count to 30 and I'll let you go. And so they count to 30 and they look around and there's no one there. And then he jumps back out at them. Can you imagine like the trauma response you're going to have from that for the rest of your life? You're never safe.
Yeah. I actually wanted to bring this up a little later, but I'm going to do it now because it actually is perfect timing. Candace DeLong, she from, ID, everyone knows her from the ID station. She actually was discussing this idea of rape trauma syndrome, which I've never heard before, but is exactly what you just talked about. So it's a version of PTSD that the victim feels like they're never safe from their perpetrator. So it's that idea, like the perpetrator says, if you call the cops, I'll find you and I'll kill you. And, sometimes they actually do pop up in the person's life. And that kind of confirms like, oh, I'm never safe. I'm never going to be able to leave them. So the victim, often relationships will fall apart. They might move frequently, or they might move from, where it happened, kind of feeling like it's called a geographic tier. Like if I get away from where the problem happened, then I'll be happy.
But it doesn't work. Like this, that happens with this specific type of rape, or could that happen pretty much with any kind of rape?
I think it probably could happen with any rape, I would imagine.
Yeah. It's just like this nature of it where it's like you think, like you see that in movies and stuff too, where like, all right, when walk 50 paces and then you could take the blindfold off, whatever. Like that whole thing. It's never like walk 50 paces, take the blindfold off, and then get attacked again.
Yeah.
It's just something so like
it's scary.
Evil. Yeah.
It's very scary. Evil. It's very scary. And I think it's also scary if you were to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's overpowered, which I mean, I guess if you're being raped, you most likely are. But like if you weren't able to fight back because the other person was so powerful, that must be really like the ultimate scary is like nothing I do is going to protect me. So that was his days as a Scarborough rapist. So he actually met Karla. They meet October 17th, 1987 at Howard Johnson, a.k.a. Hojo's, as Karla's attending a vet conference. So he's 23 at the time. She's 17. They meet. Sparks ignite. They have sex. They have sex that night.
Well, there's a power dynamic right there. That's a big,
But I read that. I was like, oh, that's crazy. And then I'm like, oh, wait. Paul basically has sex with everyone, like when he meets them. That's his thing, actually. So it's not actually that crazy. So, yeah. Well, this is strange to his friends because, according to his friends, Paul never gets attached. But something about Karla is clearly different. Flash forward a little bit. He's welcomed by the family and eventually moves in with them. He ends up proposing to her on December 9th of 1989. So, I mean, their relationship's like a whirlwind. 2 years later, he's proposed and they're proposing in Niagara Falls on a trip together. So, again, from the outside, seems really nice. Seems like things are going well, right? She is unaware at this time that he has been cheating and also engaging in rape of young girls. So at this point in 1989, she does not know, but she does become aware of some of his fetishes, I guess you would say, and his behavior as she ends up catching him peeping in on her 12-year-old sister, Tammy. As I mentioned, the outside, you see this picture, this perfect picture. The inside, it's a lot different. Their relationship is actually super rocky. There's abuse. It's tense. Karla struggles with jealousy, especially of Paul and Tammy, her 12-year-old sister. Because
she sees him trying to pull away, and she has to think about what's worked. What has she seen worked in the past? Yeah. And she starts to make a plan
she sees Paul like desiring this 12-year-old, which is crazy that wouldn't be something that would like alert her that this needs to end. But also her sister Tammy, I guess, is sort of flirtatious back to him. At one point, they actually go for a ride. Like they say, like they're going to go to the store, and they're gone for 6 hours. And then when she gets back,
Paul and the little sister are gone for 6 hours.
6 hours together. When they get back, Paul admits that they made out while they were out. This is a 23-year-old man
and a 12-year-old girl.
So, Greg, similar to her mom, how does Karla decide she's going to solve this problem?
She's got to feed his desires. She's got to, give him what he wants. And so, Dave, I guess you get to be the one who tells everyone what happens here. Like, how does she satisfy Paul?
She basically sacrifices her sister. She decides she's going to get.
I mean, sacrifice is a great word because it's a virgin.
Yeah.
It's family. Yeah. It's like, sacrifice in every sense of the word. Like the ancient thought of sacrifice. Right. This is it.
She gifts her sister to him so he can take her virginity. She drugs her sister with drugs that she uses on animals. And she does not dose this well. And her sister ends up becoming so drugged, she dies.
Yeah. The young kid dies at the hand of her own sister, feeding the deviant sexual desires of her husband. Yeah. A child is killed.
She not only gifted her sister to him, she took part in it.
She did. And this wouldn't be the first time she takes part in these situations. Shortly after this, she brings one of her young teenage work friends home to satisfy Paul. Drugged and raped her. She almost dies too.
How do we know this, Greg? How do we know that she took part?
Dave, we know this and we know the intensity of it. We know all the gruesome details because they taped it all. They taped all these things. They taped the sodomy, the rapes, the torture, the embarrassment, the humiliation that they did to all these young women, all three of them.
This was a time when I feel like videotaping was relatively new and exciting, I guess, like home movies, like the way, like a camcorder would be sort of like new, like that.
Like America's Funniest Home Videos, and it says like 1993 on the bottom.
Yeah.
That's gonna be good.
I heard a detail about Karla's response to her sister's death that really highlights who Karla is. I don't know if you heard this, Greg, but she wrote a letter to a friend expressing her frustration and annoyance at her dad 1 month after the sister's death because he was mourning and it was starting to affect his attitude about their wedding. So she was like, I guess he had said at some point, like, oh, maybe we shouldn't do the big wedding. You guys should just kind of go to like a city council and get married. And in her letter, she's like, oh, no, I'm not. That's not happening. Like, why? Like, basically refusing to acknowledge that. She goes, I know he's sad about my sister Tammy's death and all, but it's like she has no empathy for her own sister.
Family. Yeah.
Her own family.
So, reason number one why I think she's the darker sociopath, but there's more reasons. Should we go on?
Yes, Greg, please do.
She had their first purposeful murder. They kidnapped and tortured a 14-year-old, and after 24 hours of this torture, they kill her.
So, Greg, was Tammy considered?
She's one of the murder victims.
There's 3 murders, right?
Yeah, she's one of them.
So she's one. Then there's this other one that you just mentioned.
Right. And then there's one after who's around the same age. But instead of just torturing her for 24 hours, they torture her for 3 days. 3 days of all this. He's into humiliating sodomy. I mean, we don't really need to say more than that. 3 days of this rape before finally killing her. And like you said, we're not just like getting this from, an autopsy or medical examiners. This is all filmed.
Yeah.
And the way this finally kind of starts to come to a head is we catch a break because Paul makes a mistake, and he makes a mistake by getting fed up with Karla and beating her with a flashlight. So around this time, like, it's like the stars are aligning because the rapes had caught up with them too. And they finally got a DNA match and realized that it was Paul. So the investigators go to Karla, and because of what he did to her, otherwise, if he hadn't done this to her, they would have maybe never like connected these dots. So they would have found out about the murders. But because she decides she's going to be cooperative, she's going to tell them that she doesn't want to be portrayed as a monster. She wants them to think of her as what the FBI labels a compliant witness. So she wants to give everyone the idea that she was this person in this relationship and she was being abused and being forced to take part in these horrible, in this horrible abuse. So you would think to yourself, Dave, like, yeah, fine. Like they can think that all they want, but once they have the tapes, they're not going to be able to justify giving her this break, because she makes a deal that she's going to get 12 years, for manslaughter, because she's just part of this. She's not the mastermind. Yeah. She doesn't want this to happen. But, they go to trial and the tapes are withheld. And it will be, sometime after the trial where they're finally brought back into the fold and the lawyer will be charged, but nothing will ever come of it. And this lawyer's so grimy that Karla ends up marrying his brother, which is someone who clearly knows and is well aware of everything that she did. So in the tapes, you can see that Karla is not only like participating, but she's instigating, she's
encouraging, right?
Yeah. She's encouraging this. She wants this to happen. And for me, it's almost like, you talk about her jealousy and her, it's almost like they have this pact where, fine, I'll feed this desire, but I can't live with the jealousy of there being another woman out there that you slept with. So if you're going to sleep with these women and you're going to take their virginity,
you're going to kill
we're
them.
Going to have to kill them.
Well, it's interesting because that last victim you mentioned, there was some story that the reason they killed her wasn't necessarily jealousy, but it was because eventually they had to go to work. And they didn't want to just leave somebody, in wherever they had her, in like, what if she escaped or something, like pretty much like, oh, we don't want to get caught, so I guess we got to kill her now. And that kind of doesn't fit, but I get what you're saying, and I think you're probably right. I think there was probably like, all right, I think I've had enough of this, but I don't think they really viewed these people as humans.
Right. Yeah. Or maybe that's part of like the humiliation, Dave, like why she was completely all set with like fine with the humiliating aspect of it so that she could take part in the humiliation. So she doesn't have to feel as jealous. Like she has power over this person.
I think she was feeding like off of Paul's power. I think that she was gaining power by him and being around him, to see somebody be able to commit these acts. And like, it's so bizarre. Like you said that stat in the beginning, but for two people who completely lack empathy to be able to like connect and like unspoken, be able to like know that about each other and it actually connects. That's so scary.
Well, there's a couple things about that. Like one is, there's something that, again, in FBI, I don't know if this might have been on something, Murdar. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
It's this idea that a murderer.
Oh, I got you.
Can get the sense that another person might be feeling the same way. And I've heard this explained where, I've had, been counseling addicts where I would ask them, like, genuinely just curious, like, how do you know who has, like, how do you know where to get drugs? Like, how do you know? And it's like, you just kind of know, like, there's a sense of it. And I think that's part of it. And the other part is, it's a lot easier. Just think about like Woodstock 99 on like on a smaller scale. Like it's a lot, like individually, like Paul never murdered anyone before he met Karla.
No. And I think that speaks so loudly.
Yeah. Like it's so much, like you can kind of put it off on the other person. You can but together, people do a lot more insidious, dangerous, worse things to people than they would on their own. It's like they feed off each other. What is that?
Because I mean, he is totally fine with allowing them to leave and just live with fear and live with whatever he's, done to them. But for her, they need to die. And I think that, it really, because, he was the Scarborough rapist. He wasn't the Scarborough killer. So it changes him.
But here's the thing though, right? Like, so yeah, he's the Scarborough rapist. That's not to say that he wouldn't have become a serial killer, because we all know that there's like this escalation process too.
Well, the boss, I think about the Boston Strangler.
And also the guy in San Francisco.
Yeah, the Boston Strangler started as a peeping Tom progressed to rapist, then to obviously murder.
There was that guy in Canada. I mean, what's going on over there? That was stealing women's underwear, and that escalated to murder over time. So there is this escalation.
What's going on over there? There's 3 people.
Yeah. So yeah, there's all like maple syrup and
murder
and murderers, I guess. So it's
Greg. I want to like bring up another thing with this final victim. So she's discovered by was a father and son who are out fishing.
What a
so they totally botched the. They weren't good at getting rid of the body. They were kind of good, but like not good, because they had this idea. They were like dismembered the body. We didn't mention how gruesome this is. They dismembered the body, and they put the body parts in cement blocks, which I can't even picture what this looks like. But they put the body parts in cement blocks, and they would put them in the, I guess, in a body of water, so they would sink.
Yeah.
So they would sink. They couldn't. They had all the cement blocks in, like, I forget what exactly they were all in. If it was like a barrel or something, they couldn't lift it, so they just left it. Yeah. They're like, forget it. That's impossible. Instead of like, let's just do this one at a time, they just left it, and then like a father and son find it. So, and while this is happening, this is right as they're getting married.
Yeah, this is
it. And another part of the story, like the time. This could only happen at this time. Like the DNA would have that would have been so quick. Now, if this was now, this would have been solved so fast, and all this stuff would have been solved really quick. But they took a DNA swab. Only certain labs could do it. So it's not like it is today, where like we have easy access to be able to do. Well, I assume we have easy access to DNA testing. It took like 2 years to identify the DNA.
Yeah, it took forever. And back then they were going on sketches and fingerprints. It's like, geez, it's amazing that you caught anybody. And another thing, Dave, that I kind of just glossed over, she only spent 12 years in prison. 12 years for orchestrating, in a sense, these horrific murders. And before she moves away with the lawyer's brother, she's in a relationship with another guy who is, in jail for strangling a woman. Yeah. So it's another diagnosis is hybristophilia. It's part of the paraphilic disorders, right? It's like that's when someone is sexually aroused by a criminal offender, and you see that a lot.
Yeah.
Right. Dahmer had a lot of followers. I mean, Manson. I mean, Bundy. These guys had fangirls and boys. Yeah. I think there's something so dark about that.
There really is. Yeah.
So she does 12 years. Canada's prison system is a little more relaxed than ours. The most you can get is 25 years, and then you'll be available
max.
For parole. Yeah, that's the max. So you can get a life sentence, but after 25 years, you have to be available for parole.
Yeah.
So he's already been up for parole. I mean, he got denied, but still, I mean, the fact that she's out is wild. And what was her husband, like, who marries and has children with this woman after Dave, this is the lawyer's brother. He saw those tapes. Like, they're divorced now, fine. But he married the woman and he saw what she did. So what's up with this guy?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel bad for this guy. He might be in some trouble. I think an interesting thing about Paul is that clearly he's done some work in prison.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how I know he's done some work? Listen to this quote. I overused sex. That led to those cognitive distortions.
Oh, wow.
Sexually objectifying woman is a juvenile cognitive distortion. As soon as I hear someone say cognitive distortion, I'm like, this is a man who has clearly done some therapy.
Yep. That's the guy that's talking to David Burns.
Yeah. This guy is doing cognitive behavioral therapy all day long in prison.
Yeah. It's interesting too, though, how we see this a lot, because women are typically in these cases seen as the victims. I mean, most of the time that's the case. Men are the perpetrators of violent crime at a staggering percent of the time, right?
Yeah.
But is there some kind of, like reverse sexism here, where she was kind of granted this pass in a sense?
I think she benefited greatly from a few things.
Okay.
She benefited greatly from being the one who came in as a victim, because we talked about how she came in because of that abuse. So right there, she looks like a credible witness, incredible victim. She's able to, make a statement that fits in with the scheme of how they met her. She comes in as an abused person, and then she portrays this picture of a really abusive guy that she knows, right? And she has a ton of dirt on him that, she can really utilize against him. Is this because she's a woman? You know what? 1990s, I guarantee you the idea of a woman being this violent, this intense.
Yeah.
I doubt they would have really thought a woman would be capable of this. That looks like her.
Right. It's another thing too. It's like once we see someone as innocent or guilty, we have a tendency to let confirmation bias.
That's a great point.
It's think about
holy crap, you just made one great point, dude.
Yeah. Well, hopefully some people stuck around till the end. But do you remember like Scott Peterson when that whole thing? I always think of that when I think of confirmation bias, because it's like that guy, they gave me like the scoop. Actually, it happens to me all the time. Like, they do like you watch half a Dateline and you're like, it was that guy. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh God, I would have sent that guy to prison.
Well, Greg, I hope you don't take this offensively. I feel like you particularly use like, it is going to hurt. Like you look at attraction and you make judgments. But then you're always in our conversations, like reflecting about how disarming that can be. But I feel like you would fall for that really easy.
You mean like, just explain that a little bit.
Like what we're talking about here. Like, I feel like you see like an attractive person and you kind of make a judgment based on their physical looks. But then when we're having these conversations, you always kind of talk about like the duality. But like, I feel like in reality, if you saw someone, you would be quick to make that judgment, like, oh, they're this way because they look like that.
Oh, I don't know.
I feel like you would. I don't
know if that's true about
because it shocks you, and I don't think it shocked. I feel like it shocked you more than it shocks me that there can be an attractive person who has really unattractive like behavior.
I'll tell you what I think. I think that there's a biological element to beauty being disarming. None of us are impervious to it, because beauty has been safe our entire lives. Like beauty meant that whatever that is healthy. So it's like built into our DNA to kind of trust it, that's like part of who we are. And also I think, unfortunately, a good looking person has a significantly different life than a person who's not. They live a different life. They have a different existence. One I'll never know, but that's just true. Do you not agree?
I don't think it's necessarily always positive.
No, I suppose I don't either. And I think that's a good point.
Think about when people only view your beauty versus caring about any other quality about you, or that they are constantly seeking sexual encounters with you because of your beauty versus like any other kind of encounter.
How it feels. It's hard.
You've never felt that. So, I mean, that's so hard for you to understand. I'm just kidding.
Everyone's just like, I just want to have a sexual encounter with that guy. No, you're right. I guess I've never felt that. Well, maybe a young Charpentier.
What are you talking about right now?
This
is like the ramblings of a madman.
The diary of a madman. That's it.
So I, just with these two, like I hear the word psychopath get thrown out a lot for like that word's like psychopath. I love when people are talking about it. Like, would you ever diagnose someone as a psychopath?
There's no such thing.
Yeah. So why do people keep using it in clinical forms when they're talking about serial killers? It drives me nuts when I hear it in like people trying to sound like they're being medically like, like giving medical evidence about something. And they're like, oh yes, he's a clinical psychopath. Like, no,
it's like, it's like psychopathy, I guess you could call it, is like the way a person's behaving. it's not essentially like a diagnosis. It's like
no. Right.
It's not like, oh, Karla and they're both psychopaths. Like that's not a diagnosis.
I actually, I would love for Paul to have like a brain study done at some point to see if he did have some like traumatic brain injury as a child, and if that affected the area of his brain that process that like has empathy and things like that. If that part of the brain was
like, when they do those scans, or they can watch your brain light up and show you like puppies, and then show you puppies getting murdered. And for some people, that just doesn't light up. That's just, there's no sense of empathy. And that's a scare. That doesn't mean you're going to be a serial killer or anything like that. Like a lot of stars have to align for that.
I work with a ton of individuals,
antisocial personalities.
Yeah, who just tend to not have empathy or they can't put themselves in other people's shoes and like say like, oh, I can understand how they would feel. Like some people just don't have that capacity. You're right. It doesn't make someone a serial killer, but given the right recipe, like we always talk about, the home environment, the upbringing. So can you imagine how Paul must feel? I don't imagine, please. This is just a total, like, do not imagine. I don't mean it that way. But like, he conquers, right? Mm-hmm. He conquers women. So he does the most powerful thing he can do to them by raping them, right? Yeah. And even more so, like he targets younger females, hoping that they're going to be virgins. It's so gross to even think about his behavior. But if you think about it from the realm of someone who felt powerless as a child, who was a victim of abuse, who constantly witnessed abuse, who also just saw like bad treatment towards women, and that's okay. But then also wasn't able to he wasn't respected by others either. Like they, would tease him about smelling bad. So like for someone who felt like they lacked any power, any nurturing, any caring, and then he does this, he must feel like a superhero. He must feel like he's or a villain, I guess, a super villain, but he must feel like he's conquered the world when he does this, when he achieves this. It must just feed this ego that he doesn't have.
Or maybe it's not even like, because if he can't have empathy, is like, can he feel joy?
No, but I think he can feel power. I think he can feel power,
and maybe just like some like satisfaction or like animalistic.
Yeah. We're acknowledging that like he it's not like he was doing it for sexual satisfaction, right? It's more about the act is symbolic. So I think that's super powerful to think about. All
right, so let me ask you this then, because you've been ragging on Paul, which I appreciate. You should be. But who's the worst? Who was the worst character here?
I think they're both equally bad. This is going to sound terrible. I think Paul's behavior makes more sense to me in the realm of like, I can try to dissect it.
Track it. Yeah, you can track it.
And I can dissect it. I can look at it. I can analyze it. I can say like, that probably stems from this. This probably stems from this. Karla? No, I shouldn't even say that because I can kind of see some of that, but like.
No, I think hers comes from a place of self-deceit. So he's missing something, right? He's missing empathy. He's missing something. He doesn't have.
And then I think about just a really weak, lacking power type person who didn't have love and doesn't understand love and doesn't. But I feel like maybe he actually did feel love with Karla. And that's why they stuck together.
That's like the closest thing to a satanic ritual I can even think of. She sacrificed her 12-year-old virgin sister. That's the darkest thing I can think of.
Her mom said, "Let's have a threesome with your mistress, to keep you here because you're pulling away."
Yeah,
right?
I know, but.
It's all both of them are so taught, but they didn't intend to kill Tammy.
No, I know they intended
that was a mistake.
Although
but she didn't care.
She's not like, she didn't just grab some tranquilizer off the shelf. She, must have known something about, like, she was
she knew how to use it, but they heavily dosed her. Was it her the first time that they did it? Oh no. There was a coworker of hers.
I mentioned her, and they almost killed her again.
They almost killed her because they did it twice, right?
Yeah.
And the first time, it didn't work, right? So they had to like actually put it over her mouth. Like they put it in something she was like consuming, and then it didn't work. So they actually had to put it on something and put it over her mouth, and then she passed out, and then like woke up and didn't remember anything. And they're like, "Oh, have a good day. See you at work."
Yeah, and she didn't remember.
And then they did it again to her.
Well,
this is a dark story.
Yeah, well, Karla's free. So
Karla's free.
Just think about that.
Hit her up, everyone. Hit her up.
She's been free.
She stay free.
You know what I mean? She spent 12 years in prison for this. She spent a year in prison for every year of her sister's life.
What do you know when Paul's out?
I mean, he's up for parole every so often. So he could be out at any time. He's already been up for parole a couple times and he's been denied twice. So
jeez.
Who knows? I mean, potentially he could be out.
You know, Greg, I don't know if you had this experience. I found this story hard to get into the first few times I tried researching it. And then eventually, like, I just got to a point where I found some angle about it. And like, then I was hooked. I don't know. Did you experience that at all?
About 6 months. Yeah. So about 6 months or maybe even a year ago, I listened to a few podcasts on this because I'm interested in beauty. Like you've brought up, obviously, I think you're misrepresenting me a little bit, but I think I am interested in the idea of like, there's a darkness to beauty, like Dorian Gray, these things. And so I thought this would be like a really cool, and I listened.
Nerd.
Yeah. I listened to like 3 podcasts and I don't remember exactly what they were, but I just couldn't get into it. And then this time around, for whatever reason, it became very interesting to me.
Yeah.
So maybe it is because of Ken and Barbie. Maybe it is because of the Barbie movie. I don't know.
I mean, there is an ID 4-part series about this. If you guys want to watch more about it,
I did not watch that.
It gets like, it's funny because like the storyline kind of moves quickly, and then they get a lot into like the police involvement, the trial, and for me, that's like not the most important. That's not the most interesting thing to me. I know some people will probably like that part. I actually find just them and like understanding their background and their makeup. Like I find that stuff to be fascinating about them because like they clearly to me are just products
like watching, you know, it's like watching the puzzle pieces come together of why they are the way they are is what's interesting to me.
So, you know, I think about this case, and then I think it like makes me think back to the Menendez brothers. And I don't know why, but I can't help but like feel there's a connection there. When we talk about like, first of all, we talk about wealth. We talk about like this picture of like how people see that family from the outside without really knowing what's going on. So it's almost like there's this dirty secret inside.
Yeah.
But also like how the behavior in the family really does impact the kids and like how that ends up playing out for these poor, like for these individuals, not these poor individuals. I shouldn't say that because they're committing murder, but like they're also victims too in a way. And I know it's not a hot take to like have empathy for a killer, but like their upbringing sucked as well. And they are all victims of abuse as well. And that's a weird thing to acknowledge about people who have done terrible things.
It's something about feeling elevated over other people, not having to go through the same struggles as other people. It gives you this illusion that you're better than them, or that you're
that you can pass judgment on them.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I think that's a dangerous thing to do. And we all kind of do it to some extent, but it can be really dangerous because we don't know how we would be in those same situations, and we don't know what might happen in our futures, you know, that might test us.
Yeah. All right.
So we could be hypocrites.
I think that's enough talking about these friggin' lunatics.
All right. So Greg's ready to take off. So I'm gonna wrap us up here. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this dark episode.
Yeah.
We'll be back next week. We'll brighten it up a little bit.
Are we gonna brighten it up?
Probably not, but you know,
I'll never brighten it up. It doesn't get too bright around here.
I'm just making a false promise that I won't keep.
Yeah.
So
false promises. That's a good episode.
Always thinking of episodes. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great night. A great week. It was Barbie week last week, so
it's Ninja Turtle week this week.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, cowabunga.
Cowabunga, dudes.
Hey, can we get please a couple
Greg's gonna plead now.
I would love so much a review.
This is the ugly side of Greg. You guys always see
Dave,
the beautiful exterior.
I don't remember Joe. who wrote us a great email, and we appreciate it very much. Thanks for that.
Yeah, so our listener, Joe, gave some great feedback, some great suggestions. Thank you, Joe.
And we will use one of those suggestions.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there was probably a few of them, actually.
I was like, this guy should be doing the podcast. He's way smarter than us.
I know, he is pretty smart. I had a lot of shame. But that's my burden, you know?
Yeah, that is your burden. What are you gonna do?
All right. Good night, everyone. Get out of here. Get out of here, you.
Good night.
Be calm.
All right.
Peace out.